welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, and alongside me, as always, is Dr. Dave. How you doing, Dr. Dave?
Most excellent, Dr. Joe.
Well, that's good to hear. Excited to be here, and thank you all for tuning in. If you've been here before, this is your more than one time attending or being involved with our podcast. Thanks for returning. But if this is your first time, thanks for tuning in. Hope you'll gain something out of this podcast. So this podcast is the personal, professional, and career development podcast. And we have a ton of material out there. We'd love for you to check it out. With that, if you are viewing this episode, you'll see that we have a special guest with us here today. So I want to introduce you all to Dr. John Betterson. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you. And so with that, would you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
You're great. Yeah. So, like you said, my name is Dr. John Betterson. My background, sort of, it wasn't a straight line, I would say. I'm from New York originally, from the Bronx, New York, from the inner city.
Okay.
And I went to college in Virginia. I went to Virginia State University for a stint. And I left that school and then I joined the military. So I am a retired Air Force veteran. And that I would say was probably the beginning of my journey to becoming a student and emphasize the word student of leadership.
Okay.
Obviously, the military does emphasize leadership and followership, and they help us to understand, the chain of command and how to take orders, how to give orders. But it is a unique experience if you've ever had it, in that it's a really dynamic concept, leadership.
Mhm.
People toss that word around a lot in organizations and, pick your gathering. You have a group of people together. Inevitably, someone's going to stand up and as the leader.
Right.
And then you see all the things that come with that. But I learned a lot, quite a bit in the military. I'm still learning. And throughout my career in the military, I ended up finishing my undergraduate and my master's degree. And then I ended up at a little old school in Virginia Beach called Regent University, which really took my leadership journey on a whole nother level. And then after that, I retired, and now I work for federal government. I work for NASA, and so very interesting career. I'm still a federal employee right now, and I also teach part time, which
Okay.
puts another dynamic on
Yeah.
the whole understanding of leadership.
Yeah.
I teach it, and I'm a facilitator of learning. Let me correct that. I don't like the term teaching. I mean, no one's really teaching much of anything today, I believe. I think the people who are in the know understand that you're a facilitator, not
Right.
necessarily a teacher, right?
Right.
Especially with the advent of technology. So facilitate learning in a couple of schools. Lots of fun doing that, and I also have my own consulting firm. Again, I consult on leadership wellness and other things, and I'm enjoying it. So I do speaking as
Okay.
well, and always out there on the circuit. People will request for me to come in and speak to their organization about a myriad of topics. And my most recent passion is emotional intelligence. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's me.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
first, I want to thank you for your service. Uh,
Yeah.
we're all veterans on this podcast here, and we all have some similarities, which is always kind of cool to hear. But like you said, we all had our own different journeys and how we got to where we are today. So thanks for sharing that with us and introducing yourself to our audience.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
and you already kind of jumped us right off into the topic. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and have you start us off with emotional intelligence.
Oh, great. Wow. Well, thank you. So, again, for those who, it's not a new term, I'll say that. Actually, that work was really delivered to us by Daniel Goleman. He is considered the sort of the grandfather of emotional intelligence. It did not originate with him either, but he really brought it to the fore. And so he wrote a book back in the 70s entitled Emotional Intelligence, and it it is a concept that I find extremely fascinating because it covers a broad spectrum of interpersonal mastery and how we are to interact with one another, right? As teammates, leader follower alignment, co-workers. It runs the whole gambit. And so there's several areas of emotional intelligence. Some of them include, empathy, self-regulation and self-management, social skills. And when you look at emotional intelligence, the whole idea behind that, the definition that Mr. Goleman offers us is this, that emotional intelligence is the ability to control one's own emotions and emotions of others. Now, some may today argue that it's impossible to control someone else's emotions, and they lean towards managing emotions. But in either case, it is the idea of understanding our reactions to stimuli and how we respond to that stimuli and how our response affects others, which is a real case. Dr. Goleman opens up his book with an example of the circulatory system and how in our bodies, the circulatory system is it's inward. Obviously, you can't see it, you can't touch it because it's but our breathing and all the things that happen inside of us. If we're near a person, he argues that, like, take your anxiety. If you're anxious about a thing and you start to breathe heavy and maybe you can see your breaths, you're taking deep breaths. Eventually, if you're around someone like that long enough, their breathing will start to impact your breathing, even though the systems are closed. You still have an impact on somebody else based on how you're responding in a given situation. So he kind of opens with that, and then he talks about the more nuanced approach to emotional intelligence and how we behave, how we communicate, right? How we get along and share information and exchange ideas. And so people often look at that concept, I find, as somewhat of a difficult thing to grasp, but it's pretty fundamental if you think about it. I mean, everyone, and I mean everyone, from a child all the way to adulthood, everyone exercises a degree of emotional intelligence every day, every single day. You think about, your favorite sports team, right? And you want to communicate to the group how excited you are about a game or a season or a player, and then you respond and you add this energy, right, to your expression with hopes of inspiring someone to either buy into your excitement or to convince them on what you're thinking, right? And by doing so, you have an impact on the people that you're communicating with. And that's how emotional intelligence works, right? In a nutshell. And the same is true of a sale or some good deal or a bad deal, right? How we communicate, right? We're hoping to invoke a response from the people we're communicating with. And when we do that, a response happens. And as a result of what we say and what we do, people will engage or not engage, right?
Right.
So that's the opposite effect of it. Sometimes your expressions can shut someone down, right? Knowingly or unknowingly, unwittingly sometimes, right? Um, Sometimes when I teach on emotional intelligence or facilitate, I should say, there's this anecdote I like to share. It's called the lawnmower anecdote. That's what I call it anyway. So um, it's a man and woman. They're at home and they're looking out on the landscape of their backyard. They see all the shrubbery and the grass and the trees and all the things that have to happen, and specifically the lawn. And so they take a deep breath. The wife goes in the house and the husband goes out to the shed to get the lawnmower to start his work. Well, then he opens the door. He remembers, oh, wow, this is that lawnmower that's been giving me all these problems. We need a new lawnmower. So the husband goes back in the house, talks to his wife, says, sweetheart, I just remembered the lawnmower that's in the shed. It's been acting up. We need a new lawnmower. His wife turns around, ever so lovingly, and says, I hear you on this. I hear you, sweetheart, but I think we're okay. The husband, obviously perplexed, he's like, well, apparently she didn't hear what I had to say. So he raises his voice just a little bit to emphasize the point. Oh, sweetheart, I don't think you understand. This lawnmower is giving me problems. I really don't want to put up with that. I think we need a new lawnmower. Right? Same tone, turns around ever so sweetly. I can appreciate that, sweetheart, but I think we're okay. Well, now the husband's starting to get a little bothered. So he started to now escalate and raise his voice, thinking that the tenor of his voice will, make the difference here. So he's climbing higher and higher. Sweetheart, his voice is getting louder. We need a new lawnmower. And each time he gets higher, his wife never moves. She turns around on each instance and says, well, I hear you, but we're okay. Well, they go through this exercise for a while. And eventually, what do you think happens? The husband gets so high in his expression that he has no other place to go. And he comes right back down to the same level that his wife was at because she never moved. And so the moral of that story, after a full 15 round heavyweight bout, the winner of that negotiation and the champion was the wife, right? She was able to not only manage her own emotions in that exchange, but at the same time, she was able to regulate and control, manage the emotions of her husband. And it's a fascinating anecdote. I share that a lot of times with the group, but it's just a demonstration, right, of how our response or non-response can elicit or shoot down a response. So again, just a small example of emotional intelligence. And I'm fascinated by the concept because, the leaders in the room who really understand that concept and have a full grasp of it, right? They have high emotional intelligence. And because of that, they're very effective, extremely effective, not just with communication, but with how they interact with their group, right? And they understand that, right? The group dynamics. We hear about group dynamics all the time and teamwork and collaboration. Well, guess what? Emotional intelligence fuels all of that, right? And without that, it might be a difficult task. So anyway, yeah.
John, I think this is a very fascinating topic. I don't believe we've had it on the show, on the
I
podcast
don't think
before.
so.
And if we
Yeah.
have, it's been a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I guess my general intelligence might be lacking in remembering. But
No.
um, so where does emotional intelligence start? Does it start on
Right.
the inside? Does it start as a reaction? Or, I mean, is it something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think both, right? I think it's primarily tied to your personality, the way you've grown up, uh, the things you're exposed to. I'll tell you, and to help explain that even further, there was yet another offshoot of emotional intelligence referred to as gentelligence. So Megan
Okay.
Gearhart, right, a young lady had put this concept together. And basically, gentelligence, and just like the name, implies that there's intelligence tied generationally, right? So you think about where we work today, right? Today's workforce, you have upwards of five, believe it or not, five different generations working shoulder to shoulder, from
Right.
the traditionalists all the way down to Gen Z, right? Gen A, I believe, is even old enough to start working now. But there's about five now, right? If you go across the spectrum, and with that, there are nuances that people don't realize that are invisible to all of us, right? And it's this idea of how we react to situations. So Megan opens up her work with an example. She does this quasi social experiment. So she has four different generations in the room: uh, traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, and then millennials. Four different generations. And so she asks this group two questions. Well, she says the first question is it's a scenario. She asks them to pretend that there's an important email that has to be sent out. This email is critical to get the mission done. When the email is sent out, what is the expectation of the response to that email? And so the baby boomers in the room or the traditionalists in the room say, well, maybe about 6 or 7 days. Right? The boomers say, oh, maybe 4 to 5 days, roughly. The Gen X people say, oh, maybe 2, 3 days. Millennials say 24 hours. So think about that. just the expectation of the response to an email, right, is varied, right? And these folks
Mhm.
probably, in a lot of cases, work together. So now, if you don't
Right.
understand that people have different expectations for the same outcome, the same topic, without that understanding, this is how miscommunication and difficulty happens, right? Because everyone's missing one another. The expectations are off, right? And if you're not the leader in the room who's unaware, if you're unaware of this dynamic, you will never understand why you have all this entropy, right? This decay, this breakdown in your team. Why can't we get along? I can't get my arms around this. What is the problem? And sometimes it's generational. Due to what? How we've all grown up. So, to Megan Gearhart's point, each generation has shared values in such a way that they all sort of align with how they've grown up. And so, depending on the generation you're tied to, right? And this is not, yeah, I don't want to paint with a broad brush because obviously some people may swing, across that spectrum. But
Right.
generally speaking, there are these groups that sort of align in terms of their value system, right? You take the folks on this call, the three of us. We're probably from the generation where when it comes to work, we want to be loyal. You stay at a job for 20, 30 years, and right, you put in your work, you put your head down and you leave. Try that today. Today, people 5 years on the job, they're gone,
Right.
right? And you can't change it. That's the dynamic. That's the reality of where we live, right? Um, so again, understanding how we communicate, how we respond to situations and information is critical. And so, again, having that high emotional intelligence or EQ, which is the emotional quotient, right? Much like IQ, right? There is a rubric by which we can all look to and sort of see where we fall on the spectrum for emotional intelligence. How low or high is your emotional quotient? There's a bunch of tests, free tests that you can take online to sort of see where you are. You answer all these questions and they give you a score at the end. And then you can kind of work your way from there and assess your emotional quotient, which speaks to your emotional intelligence.
Wow. Well, I think about all the leaders that I've had in the past, and I think about the effective ones, and what you said about building a team and people getting to know each other, know what their expectations are, those types of things. I think they've been the best or most effective because they've done that. They've taken that time so that
Absolutely.
all the team members understand their team members,
That's right.
those members of the team, so that they can
Yeah,
relate to them and know what the expectation is, know what
that's right.
how they see things, how they view things,
Right.
and that's again, I commend those leaders that do that.
Yeah. You think about families. Just think about the simple family dynamic, right? Mother, father, or even if you're from a single parent home, right? Those parents, if you have multiple children, guess what you organically start to develop and build? Emotional intelligence, because no two children are the same, right? You look, my wife and I, we have seven. Are you kidding me? How many
Oh
personalities
wow.
we're dealing with, right? Seven children from the same two parents. And you would think, well, that's
Wow.
easy. They come from both of you. No, that's seven different personalities. That's
Yeah.
seven different responses. That's seven different ways of thinking. That's so now you come together. How do you engage with one child over the other? It,
Right.
it can't be the same because they're different people, right?
Right.
And so if you're paying attention, you're going to have to now earn your money as that parent or that leader in that situation and understand how does this person respond
Yeah.
emotionally to X and what is going to be my response, right, when they approach me with something. Because now the opposite is true. It's not just me responding to understanding how they respond. I have to now regulate my responses based on each and every one of them. And it's going to be different, right?
Right.
Situations are going to come to me differently. Communication, they're going to come to me with their own personality and their own nuances. And I'm going to have to manage that somehow because if you paint with a broad brush, we all understand how that works, right? Some people are going to fall by the wayside or be left out or disenfranchised because you have missed the mark. And
Right.
it's not a perfect. science, right? We've all been there where we've missed it. You can tell when you're trying to, win someone over, and for some reason it's not clicking with them, right? I can tell you, I remember the first time I started adjunct work. I was in a seated position. I was in a seated classroom where I had to brick and mortar, and so I'm looking out at 25 faces, and I'm going through my spiel and talking about X topic and going on and on and on. I could see after a while, this half of the room, they were with me. I think they were getting it, but the other half, they're in the headlight. I'm like, well, what in the world, right? So apparently, what I was conveying was not hitting the mark. And after so many times of failing and realizing that I'm not getting the job done, what did I discover? Sometimes there's another student in the room who can communicate that same point that I'm trying to communicate far more effectively. So if you're comfortable with that, now you can leverage your influence.
Yeah.
You lean on that student to say, hey, you have that student, right? Reach out to them, say, hey, the point that I was just trying to explain, can you expound on that? And when they do, you see all the lights go on.
Right.
Everybody gets it. So what are we doing? We're not teaching, right? We're facilitating. And when you facilitate, everybody learns, right? Everybody's growing. And I think emotional intelligence kind of goes hand in hand with that, right?
Yeah.
So,
John, I'm
yeah,
hearing some underlying themes. I'm hearing listen, observe, and adapt. That's what I'm
absolutely,
hearing.
absolutely,
And I get I love your analogy about being in the classroom, because as facilitators, that's one of the things that we're taught to understand. And they don't call it necessarily emotional intelligence. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's really
right.
what we're doing, is we're paying
Yeah,
attention
that's right.
to our audience. In this scenario, it's our students, to see
Yeah,
which ones are getting it and
right.
which ones aren't. And what do we need to do to adapt to that situation so everyone's getting it?
The emotional cues. People don't like to give credit to this individual, but Adolf Hitler used to be clergy before he, went in a different direction. But he was also the reason why he was so effective at what he did. He was an orator. He was a master orator, so he understood the cues. He understood what to say and how to say it in such a way that he would elicit the response he was looking for. That's a form of emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
He keyed in on certain phrases, right? Certain terms. So not to harp on him, but I'm just saying overall, communicators, right? The best comedians are storytellers, right? They know, right? I learned at Regent University. I'll tell you this, a credit to Regent University. Um, I learned that the best books, textbooks, books for recreational reading are the ones that are written in such a way that the author will repeat the same theme 3 or 4 different ways in the same paragraph. Why? Because he's speaking to a broad audience. So depending on your background and your exposure, you may not get the point in the first sentence. You may not get it in the third sentence, but somewhere in the middle, you're like, oh, the way he said it there, now that makes sense to me.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
so how do we communicate, right? Our points. And are we keyed in to those emotional cues? That's the I think that's the moneymaker, right? If you can master that, right? If you can communicate your point and make your communication, frame it in such a way that you resonate with most in the room, those are the best speeches. Those are the TED Talks that get all the views because they're hitting everybody in the audience, right? They're not, when they communicate, they're not saying it one way. They're saying it several different ways because there's so many different people in the audience, right? Some people, I like to use the Greek terms, um, um, ethos, pathos, and logos, right? Ethos obviously has to do with ethics, right? Right? How do I agree with this, right? What are the values? What am I hearing, right? And then you got, the pathos. How do I feel? The pathology of it, right? Am I feeling, is he pulling on my heartstrings right now, right? Right? And then the logos. Maybe I'm just completely logical. I want the doctrine. What's the doctrine? I don't care about the ethos or the pathos. I want the logic. Well, if you can frame your communication in all 3 of those, you will resonate with most in the room. And I think that's the same with how we should approach emotional intelligence. who's out there, right? Who am I talking to? The word wait. I like to use this as a great anecdote or a learning tool, right? So the word wait is actually an acronym. A lot of people don't realize that. So WAIT, wait. Why am I talking?
Mm.
And you just let that sit for a minute, right? Am I talking to communicate? Am I talking to persuade? Am I talking? Is it necessary for me to even be talking right now? Wait. Just wait a minute and ask yourself, why am I talking right now? What's the point? And who am I talking to? So anyway, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but
No, this is all good.
Yeah.
Again, I think you brought up a very good point at the very beginning when you talked about a lot of us are using emotional
yes,
intelligence, but we're
unaware.
just not aware of it. Yeah, exactly. And Dave had a good point with as facilitators, you're definitely using that, and you also made the
Yeah,
point as parents,
that's
you're
right.
using those skills, and
That's right.
so I think you're right that most people, if they knew how to frame it, then they would be better at doing it if they knew what situation, like you just said, maybe
Hmm.
use that acronym WAIT and figure
Yeah.
out when should I apply this, when should I do this or do
So,
that.
so to your point, most of us operate in this space already, but we don't have a language. So Daniel Goleman provided us with the framework, right? Like you said, the language. And think about it just naturally. How many times have we been in situations, communication, conversations where we intuitively think, hey, maybe I might not want to say this right now. Where's that coming from? That's your instinct, right? You are now calling up your emotional intelligence, right? You're being intelligent about that moment. Hey, right now, making a different judgment about whether or not I should communicate or even speak in this moment. And you
Mhm.
wait and you hold it. And to our surprise, what happens? It comes from somewhere else, or something else happens, and you sit back and you go, whew, I'm sure glad I didn't say that.
It's funny
Because
that
why?
it's
That was
funny
your
that you say
intelligence.
that, John, Dr. John, because I think I refer to that as my internal filter.
That's
And
right.
sometimes I think my internal filter needs to be changed. I think
Well,
it's full of holes,
well, we always,
and sometimes I'm just like, don't say it, don't say it. My brain's saying don't say it, but my
correct.
mouth is
That's
doing
right.
this. It's
That's
just
right. That's
flapping.
right. So it's funny that you say that your brain and your mouth because well, let me back up. And so neuroscience calls our gut second brain, right? You get a gut instinct about a matter, that is actually your emotional intelligence trying to help you. Physically, hey, warning, slow down, right? And to your point about your brain and your mouth, there's a book by a gentleman named Dr. Mort Fertel. It's about marriage and marriage fitness is actually what the book is called, Marriage Fitness. But in that book, he talks about this idea about how we communicate and how there are actually two things that happen, but we treat it as one action. So we think a thought, then we speak it. But to your point, Dave, to your point, Doc, it's up here first. That's one action. Then you speak or you don't speak. And so what we need to learn to do is create space between what we think and what we say. And that again goes back to the weight, emotional intelligence, or your gut instinct. We have to stop treating what we say and what we think and what we say as one action. Because that's the two things happening.
So
I like
we've got
that.
about 2 minutes, and I like that you held up your fingers and as 2 points, and that's actually a good segue for me to ring the bell and say we've got 2 minutes left. So about 2 minutes left. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
so again, thanks for being on the podcast, and this was very insightful.
yeah,
Just that reminder that we all have these abilities. We just have to maybe hone it a little bit more, work on it a little bit more. I really like the weight.
yeah,
I think I do that already, but I like the way you said it. So I'm
yeah.
definitely gonna be when people ask me what I'm doing, I'm gonna be like,
I'm
I'm gonna
waiting.
wait.
Wait. Why am I talking?
So yeah, so thanks for that. So anything you'd like to leave our audience with before we get out of here?
No, just I want to thank you guys for having me on. I do have one of my proudest projects here recently. I just authored an elective course at the graduate level for one of the schools I teach at in South
Oh,
Dakota.
wow.
Actually, it's online, and believe it or not, the name of the course is called the Emotional Intelligent Leader.
Oh wow,
And we're not
congrats.
we're in week 2. This is the first time it's launched this summer, and the school's pretty excited about it. Obviously, as am I. And we're going to hope that we're going to see a lot of success from it, and hopefully students will come from all over and take that course. So yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah,
Well, congratulations on that launch.
yeah, yeah. We're excited. Yeah.
Well, Dave, do you have anything to add from this
I
episode?
want to thank Dr. John Betterson for taking time out of his obviously busy schedule. And we've been working on getting Dr. John on the show for several months now. We
Yeah,
finally lassoed him and got him on the chair.
nice.
It's just long enough to sit down for a few minutes and just say thank you. We appreciate you so much. And yeah, the topic was just fascinating. I could listen to you for hours. I could sit in your classroom and just be taking notes the whole time.
Yeah, right,
Just don't grade me. Just don't grade me.
right, yeah, right. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah,
Well, again, I seconded what Dave just said. We appreciate you being on the podcast, and it definitely was insightful for me as well. I mean, I did take some notes, mental notes, and again, I will be applying that weight. I mean, I'm
yeah,
jokingly saying that, but I am going to use that.
yeah. I'm
Um,
glad.
but again, thanks for being on the podcast, and
Sure.
again, if anybody wants to get in touch with or contact Dr. John Betterson, we'll have his information in the description.
Yeah,
I'm sure he'd love to hear from the audience.
yeah,
I'm sure that he'd love to share more information about it, emotional intelligence.
yeah.
Uh, Again, thank you for tuning in to this podcast. Again, if this is your first time or if you know someone who may benefit from this information, please share the links and everything with them as well. So, with
Excellent.
that, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.